what is it about what I do that I see most affects you? In other words, what information can I give you that crops up a lot? What is the biggest problem? What are the biggest issues? And I'm going to involve you in this talk, if you don't mind, because I want to get your input into this. And I'd rather you leave here a little bit disshelved, or I should say, inspired and concerned more than happy tonight. Because what I'm going to speak about is the estates, the reason for some estates, and the current status of the law. And I want to ask you a couple of questions. Who here, and I want you all to participate, who here honestly thinks that the legislature and the politicians are protecting your interest? How many people really honestly believe that? Look what day and time we live in, because y'all happen to be right about that. Because my job as a judge is to enforce the laws passed by the legislature. I don't necessarily have to like those laws. I don't necessarily have to agree with them. However, that's what we have to enforce. As it is now, the main reason anybody would want to plan their estate is for one simple reason. I'm going to say this. Most people in this room, you're of the age that y'all come from one of the most self-reliant generations that's out there. A lot more self-reliant than the generations under you, I can tell you that, for sure. And I guess if I had to title a speech, I would say, don't be asleep at the wheel, because that's what's happening to so many people. And this system is set up to be very draconian for people who have worked hard for their money, people who have tried to save and own property and try to save for the future generations. This system does not fit that. You know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this all-out socialism, but it's pretty close. And here's the thing about the socialism I love. Socialism is a great system until you run out of spending other people's money. And whose money is that? It's your money. Because here's what happens. We continually see people come in that have passed away, or people that have gone into nursing homes. Does anybody in this room know what the average stay in a nursing home is? $6,300 to $6,800 per month. Okay, unless you were very fortunate, you went out and you planned and had some type of insurance covering that. That means that a person, you've worked all your life, you paid into Social Security, but ultimately you put your loved one in a nursing home. Medicaid, Medicare, whatever you're operating under is only going to cover a minimum of that, although you paid in much more than you'll ever get back. The problem is they will put liens on your property. In this day and age, they will do that. We see it all the time. They will put liens on your property, and so that if your children or grandchildren one day try to sell that property, and that has interest, by the way. Did you know interest accumulates on that? So they have to pay that lien off if they ever plan on selling that property. And to me, that's just not the way this system should work. So when I was saying don't be asleep at the wheel, I'm telling you, planning your estate is paramount, because the legislature has not designed the laws to protect you or your property, and that's a fact. It's not there, and it's not designed to do that. The system is set up to try to self-fund itself. And we all know that it's not funding itself very well. The projections for Social Security and Medicare are dire and dim. And so there's no doubt in my mind, from my opinion, is that this system is going to get worse because we have an aging population in the country. Since the baby boomers, we've got an aging population. And so I don't think that I've not heard a plan from any politician, any candidate running for any office that said, oh, I've got a fix to that. Here's what we're going to do. So and if they don't have a fix for it, I can tell you right now, be self-reliant, take care of yourself, just like you have all your lives. In estate planning, the way this normally works is you decide. Don't let my office, because we will decide, by the way. If you die intestate without a will, I will make that decision for you, and it'll be based on, well, it's intestate succession. And again, I swore an oath to be a judge and uphold the law. The code section tells me where your property goes, whether you intended it to go there or not. So if you don't want me to make the decision, and I'll be honest with you, I don't want to make that decision. That's fine with me, because I would rather each and every one of y'all make that decision. So it is important to do some type of plan, even if it's a simple plan, even if it's a simple will. You make that decision. It's your property. You earned it. It's your money. You make that decision. Do not put it in the hands of a politician like me. You do it. And at that point, I can put your executor or executors in place and walk out the door, and your plan goes as you've planned it. The other thing that's terrible is that the way they've designed the laws is a lot of times people, and this is where you're asleep at the wheel, people at last minute want to change the way their estate's going in order to try to avoid the type of liens that I talked about. Unfortunately, there's a 5-year look-back period. And it's a preferential transfer. In other words, you don't anticipate your loved one going to a nursing home or having some debilitating disease. It can crop up on any of us at any time. Who can plan that? Well, what happens is a lot of people try to transfer the property, but there's a 5-year look-back period. They look at this too. If you've ever enrolled anybody, I'm not sitting here bashing nursing homes. I'm just telling you the way it is. If you go to a nursing home, my sister's husband, Mr. White, is currently in one. And I went with my sister to help her fill out the forms, and they are thick. You would think you're doing a mortgage, because basically you are. That's what you're doing. You're doing a mortgage, because here's what they want to know. They want to know, what property do you have, how long have you had it, and who's got an interest in it. And that, to me, that's draconian. But that's the way it is. And basically, if you were to press the parties as to why it's so expensive and why the law is the way it is because, simply put, you're paying for people who can't. And I'll tell you, the estate planning, I would encourage everybody to do that. I mean, and a lot of times it's going to take, if you've got an estate that has property, CDs, investments like that, I would recommend going to an estate planning attorney. And the reason for that is because the federal tax code, it's like a game of cat and mouse. As quick as there are some loopholes and things that you can find to protect your assets, then you've got a group in the legislature figuring out a way to try to fill those little holes in. So you've got to have somebody on the other side that realizes that. So when you do estate planning, a true estate planning attorney, what they'll do is they'll track your plan, and if something changes with the IRS code or something that's going to adversely affect you, then usually they'll make an adjustment. But here's the thing, it's not anti-American to think this way. It's your money. It's your property. It's what you've worked for your whole life. And there's other ways. There's other ways of taxation, obviously. There's other ways that the government can get funds, but I think it's reprehensible for them to do it in this manner. I don't like it. We see it quite often. So the thing I would encourage everyone to do is be proactive and be self-reliant. Don't be asleep at the wheel. You be in charge of your assets and your property, and take charge of it and do it. Do not think that by allowing code sections like the official code of Georgia or the federal code sections are not going to protect your interest. It's going to serve those interests. And the other thing I was going to talk about tonight is how many people have had to deal with guardianships over other loved ones? Has anybody had to deal with that? This is also a very important area. As we get older, oftentimes our loved ones may fall victim to illness, anything from dementia to various other illnesses. Adult guardianships are another way of protecting your family and your assets. And that is, if you have to, rather than the state take charge of a loved one, you had an opportunity to apply for guardian conservatorship over someone. Might be a spouse, might be a grandparent. We've had them over children. In fact, we've had children that needed it. But again, it's another process where again the family can step in and you can take care of your loved one. Do not let it default to the state to do that, because there's all kinds of ramifications for that. We typically, guardianships are permanent in nature. They're relatively inexpensive to do. And what you do is you step in the shoes of that person, help them make financial decisions, help them make medical decisions. Because the family knows more than anybody else what somebody wants or desires, everything from what type of medical treatment that they want. Some people want the whole shamil all the way to the end, and some people, want minimum care. But again, that's a personal decision that people should guard, and that's something that people really should, take, again, personal responsibility in making, because who knows better than their own loved ones? If it defaults to the state, it can be it can be terrible. Once again, the decisions are oftentimes not in your hands, left up to healthcare providers, and you don't want that to happen. I'm telling you, that's just not a good idea. And it's not bad to talk about that with family members. Spouses talk to each other about that. What is it that you want? How do you want to handle things? It's just a fact of life that we sometimes, we come to that part in our life, and it's something that we do need to discuss. So you need to discuss the estate planning, make it your plan, protects your assets, protect your assets for what you've worked and you want the future generations to have. And when it comes to the personal decisions about your health care, where are you going to be, how are you going to be taken care of, and to what level and degree of treatment that you're going to receive, let your spouse know, let your kids know, let someone know. And don't be afraid. If it comes to that point in time to do the conservatorship or guardianship, trust your family first, trust your spouse, trust those people around you, let them make that decision. And again, don't let things default. That's the biggest thing I see is apathy. People just don't do anything and expect the court system or the government to pick things up. It doesn't have a good outcome. And right now, with these methods, the estate planning, the guardianships and conservatorships, you still have that independence, and you still have that right to go in and take care of your own business in a manner in which you want to. Is there any questions about any questions about the estates? Any differences in the states or how to file those? Or does anybody? Oh, go ahead.
Would the living will be part of a guardianship, so to speak?
All right.
You give them?
What your guardianship can do, your living will, and this gentleman brought up this issue, what a living will states is a living will is a set of parameters that a person has already predetermined. I want this treatment. I may not want to go to extreme measures to save me. Usually what the guardianship incorporates that. In other words, it becomes part of the guardianship. So your desires in your living will are still honored, even though there's a guardianship. So what we do is we incorporate that in the guardianship. Now there are some. This is a little bit gray area right here because you have to. It depends on how. You probably want to discuss this with your CPA or whoever does your taxes. But a lot of times, some of the most simple estates are states where you do inter vivos transactions. That inter vivos meaning transactions during your life. Those are very simple, and that preserves that 5-year window I was talking about. That's where you may do for instance, you may do a deed with the right of survivorship. And so at termination of your life, that deed fully vests with that individual. If you do it outside of the 5-year window, then you're okay. That will suffice and get by. The only issue that you have there is sometimes inheriting property that has a tax advantage, that's better than getting it during your life. You may have a larger tax consequence. But that's one thing that I see a lot of people who don't want to go full to a estate planning attorney and do the full-blown estate planning. You can do. We see that quite often. It's a pretty smart thing to do. The other thing to do, we often see people who do